you know, because they sort of have a different entrance and it's a larger piece of land. But boy, I'm glad it's not me.
Yeah, well, did get our attention because of the address. And then we realized when we went on the map, we could see where it was. And I think they have some labs back there too. Don't they still have some labs?
Yes,
they have a lot, that facility.
They have a lot of stuff going back. Actually, 2 buildings, a total of 40,000 feet.
Wow.
So yeah, they have the first building is 3 floors. It looks kind of like a UVA building, and then there's a building behind it, and of course the research and development for Project Alma was developed there, and most, you know, they're part of the National Science Foundation, and they partner with Japan and Europe, and so it's a very interesting group. And if they find an alien out there, they're going to knock on my back door, and I'm going to let you guys know. You'll be the first.
That is from the public.
Right. You'll get the heads up. They got 64 dishes and chili or some facsimile of with respect to Alma. And so they're a pretty interesting group.
And they've been around for years because Greg used to work for them when he was a student at UVA. And that was a long time ago. But they weren't at that location at that time. Yeah. Anyway. It's all good.
Right. So their administrative offices are actually at the University of Virginia. Yeah. So these are the research and science division. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning. How you guys doing?
We're doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I can't complain. It's a great day.
A great day.
Getting everybody here loaded in. It's good.
And we are live.
Okay. Excellent.
Are all the members here? Is that
B's coming on right now, I think. I see her name pop up, and here comes Brent. Is he our last member? I'm trying to count noses here.
Let's just
missing Olga.
Olga. Oh, Olga's there.
Good morning, Olga. Is she there? There she is. Okay. We have B we're waiting on. And of course, good morning, B. Oh, she has to put her audio on, right?
Good morning. How are you?
Morning. All right. I think Brent is our last one in the bottom right-hand corner.
Yep, I'm here. Video doesn't want to work, but that's okay.
I believe tech might be able to help you with that.
Brent, do you see the button that says join with audio?
Yeah. Did it not load up?
Not yet, no.
There should be a button to join the video as well, I think.
Yeah, I believe so.
When you move
There it
the
is.
mouse,
All right.
yeah, when you move the mouse, you just click start video.
Good morning, Brent.
Good morning. There we go.
Okay, so we're going to call this meeting to order, and this is the Albemarle County Citizens Advisory Committee. Today is Police Citizens Advisory Committee. Today is Tuesday, October 13th, and it is 10 o'clock. And part of the what it is we do these days is the COVID-19 protocol. So I need to take a moment out to include that at the beginning of the meeting, and I'll read from it. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with ordinance number 20-A-14, an ordinance to ensure the community, the continuity of government during the COVID-19 crisis / pandemic. The members who are electronically present at this meeting are, and please state your name present when I read your name, Brent Hall.
Present.
Brian Williams.
Present.
Diantha.
Present.
John.
Present.
Olga,
Present.
and me, of course, Richard. All right, so now that that housekeeping is sort of out of the way, I'd like to take a moment to welcome our guests. And our first one is B. Kirtley. B comes from the Ravenna District, and she is a Board of Supervisor member. Welcome, B.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here again. I attended my first meeting at the beginning of the year, and I love part of this. Thank you.
All right. Our next member our next guest that we are welcoming is Amanda Farley. And Amanda comes to us. She is the Senior Assistant County Attorney. And Amanda will be providing us with some updates with respect to the most recent short session General Assembly. I should say special session General Assembly because it's a budget session. And Amanda will be providing us an update, but she won't be opining on personal opinions about the legislation. And then, so welcome, Amanda.
Thanks for having me.
And our next guest is Captain Terry Walls. Captain Terry Walls will be doing a short presentation towards the end of the meeting, and he'll be talking a little bit about the relationship between the patrol officers in particular and, of course, his staff and the public, and how the police department and the relationship between the public and the patrol officer keeping it safe, and what measures are in place, and if there are any challenges. So welcome all. And we will move to our next item on the agenda, and that is matters from the public. And Ron, Chief Lance, could you please, as this section is generally devoted to items that are brought up that are of concern from the public between the last meeting and this meeting, and those items, whether they are recommendations or whether they are complaints, etc. We have asked the chief to provide us with a report citing those and what the police department has done with respect to them. And that item, which is referred to as matters from the public, will be on all of the agendas moving forward. So, Chief, what do you have with respect to matters before the public at this point?
Morning, everybody. I'll be very brief because we don't have any. We have not received any inquiries or questions during our last meeting or since then regarding the topics discussed in the previous meeting. So I'm hopeful that we get some engagement from this meeting to the next, so I'll be able to report out with some information for you. But as of now, we've got no inquiries, Richard.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question then. What is the best way for a citizen from the public to reach out to the police department and express a concern or a recommendation, etc.?
The best way for somebody to reach us, I've got several people that have access to an email called askthechief@albemarle.org. That's askthechief@albemarle.org, and everybody will be able to view that in my administrative staff. So there's several sets of eyes on it. So if somebody has a question, a complaint, a concern, a suggestion, or anything like that, they can email it to that email address, and we'll get back with them.
All righty, well, that's great. Have you received any, I remember our last meeting, you had mentioned that you had received some accolades from the public and how important it is over the course of the last year for those police officers that have been cited from the public for various things that they've done that has particularly pleased a member of the public in calling in. Tell us a little bit about how many and how often.
Sure. We receive them weekly. Just this past year alone, we've received 122 citizen commendations for our police officers. And that could be anything from a letter to an email to somebody stopping by the front desk, showing their appreciation by talking with somebody up front. We're closed up front now, as you know, due to COVID, but that was happening on a regular basis. So, you know, it means a lot to the officers. Somebody taking the time to write an email about an officer taking the extra 3 minutes, because I have a 3-minute rule that we spend an extra 3 minutes with our community to explain to them why we do what we do. And it seems to be resonating with our community. So I know the officers appreciate it. They get a copy of every correspondence the citizen sends in, and I put a copy of it in their personnel file, so the officers have that. So we could be happier with the accommodations the citizens are bringing in. And I've mentioned this before, and I know this group has heard it. When a citizen writes a thank you note for an officer that gave them a ticket, that means my officers are doing the right thing. Because as you all know, we've all been stopped. Well, I haven't, Richard, but you might have, and by the police in our lifetime. And it's a memorable experience. And for a citizen to take the time to send an email and say the officer was extremely professional, the officer explained the process and why they were doing what they were doing, that's what I want as a chief. So I'm very happy about that.
Very good. You had made a request for a little bit of time about a topic called certification. And so I'm going to give you an opportunity to describe what that is and how important that is to our community and the department.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll be brief, but I really wanted to talk really quick. I know our board members on here know already that we were reaccredited last month. And I really want to talk about what that means. It's, people say we're an accredited police agency. What does that mean? Well, every 4 years, this is our 6th one, every 4 years, assessors come from the Virginia Law Enforcement Professional Standards Commission, and they literally come in and spend 2 days in the police department. They evaluate and study everything from policy, procedure, equipment, training, hiring, all the way down the line. And if anybody's ever been audited by the IRS, it's the best way that I can equate it, is they look at the books, they look at everything you've been doing, and they tell you whether you're operating the right way. So I'm proud to say that we went through this, and this is a heavy lift for this agency. A lot of people did a lot of work behind the scenes. That we were reaccredited, and I'm actually one of the 6 chiefs in the state that's a commissioner on this panel. So I know how important it is, because not everybody that comes before us gets accredited or reaccredited. We were accredited, and the report that they sent back was absolutely glowing. We had no returns. It was almost a flawless report of things that we have done. So I was very proud of that. I was very proud of what we had accomplished with putting our policies together, making sure they mirror new state codes, because state code updates. And that's why we have Amanda to help us out with that. She comes to our policy meetings. So it's a really big deal for the police department, but for the community, knowing that we are a state accredited police department again. So thank you for letting me get that in, Richard. I appreciate it.
Okay, well, being that said, I'm going to go around the room, ask the members, and ask them if they have any further questions with respect to this accreditation issue. And we'll start off with Brent. Do you have any questions for the chief with respect to the accreditation and every 4 years and issues related to?
No.
All right. Brian, do you have anything you'd like to ask the chief?
No questions.
Okay. Diantha?
Just congratulations and thank you for all the hard work on behalf.
Thank you.
Yes.
John?
Similar thoughts. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Olga?
No questions.
Okay. All right, then moving on. It looks like Amanda, it's going to be showtime for you. And this has to do with the General Assembly. Again, Amanda, who is Senior Assistant County Attorney, is going to provide us updates on what I view as the 4 more major pieces that have been discussed in the General Assembly during this particular budget session, which, remember, creeping up here before long is going to be the regular session in January. So items that this session, according to the legislators, was supposed to be about a week, and we're getting closer to 2 months. So with that as a backdrop, Amanda will provide us with an update. Again, she won't be personally opining about positions she feels towards the legislation. That'll be for the committee. And then we'll go and talk about each piece of legislation to see if the members have any questions for her. And so the first one, of course, is a House bill, and so that most people understand how this works, there's 3 pieces. There's the House bill, which are usually entitled HB, and then there's a number. And then there's bills that come in on the Senate side, and that's SB. And then there's the budget. And then different legislators will provide budget amendments. So the budget has the weight of a bill, but it's really not in the billing process traditionally like the HB and the Senate bill. So let me start off with Amanda talking a little bit about HB 5051. And if you'd like, we could go to the exhibit. There should be an exhibit that can be pulled up. Do we have an IT person that can bring up the exhibit? Abby?
Move, you know what, I'll pull it up, but why don't you move forward while I get that together.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about HB 5051, Amanda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And also just to let you know, it was kind of funny that you would initially describe this as a short session because it is a special session, but it is longer than most regular sessions. So the stated purpose for the special session was threefold. It was to address budgetary issues, COVID-related issues, and police reform. Obviously, it's been very busy. There's been a tremendous amount of bills that have come through and have had different life cycles. HB 51 has now been passed by both houses and will be presented to the governor. Since we don't really have a calendar for the special session, we don't really have an adjournment date. So according to the code, the governor should have 7 days to sign this. And if he doesn't, it should become law. If they announce an adjournment date that leaves him less than 7 days, then he'll have 30 days after adjournment to take action. There are two code sections that are involved with HB 5051. One is just to the Criminal Justice Services Board to promulgate some regulations to incorporate the decertification. There we go. To incorporate some of the decertification changes that they made to 15.2/1707. Currently, what 1707, I'm sorry, let me get to my notes here.
I should also say that the relative portion of the building is in italics, and that's on page 2, but go ahead, Amanda.
Right, sorry, I'm trying to scroll down. Abby, are you doing that for me or am I able to scroll? Well, I'll just keep talking. Currently, what 15.2/1707 provides for is that if a law enforcement officer is convicted or pleads guilty to a number of different crimes, including crimes of moral turpitude, class 1 misdemeanors, sexual assaults, things of that nature, or if they fail to submit for drug screening or fail to maintain compliance with training requirements, that they would be forwarded to the board for decertification. What the proposed legislation that now has the weight of both houses passing also intends to, or appears to intend to include those situations in which current law enforcement either resign or are terminated during a process of investigation. So in each of the new subsections that are included here, Abby, can you scroll up just a little bit?
Yeah, we need the second paragraph, Abby, which is the one in italics. When you see something in italics, that means that that's the change of the language. So move down the other way a little bit, past the paragraph that we were
It'll be the
looking at.
next one.
Keep going. Okay.
That's actually, that last paragraph is what I was.
Yeah, but the second part of that, there it is with the italics.
Right.
Those are the language changes. I'm sorry, Abby, go on.
What this is meant to do in broad strokes is to capture those circumstances in which an officer is being investigated for serious misconduct. And as is sometimes, hopefully rarely, but sometimes the case, those officers may leave their instant agency and maybe seek employment somewhere else. And because there had not been a finding or because there hadn't been a full grievance process, that misconduct is not necessarily a founded misconduct and therefore not really reported to the next potential agency that this law enforcement officer may be applying to. So this proposed legislation is supposed to capture, for the purpose of decertification, those officers who are terminated or resigned for a violation of state or federal law. If they have a pending drug screening and they quit, or are terminated. And again, serious misconduct, as is defined, or as terminated or resigns while there is something related to their credibility, integrity, or honesty regarding exculpatory or impeachment evidence in a criminal case. So again, this is meant to capture and to decertify those law enforcement officers who have not necessarily had a finding against them, but there is a question as to their professional conduct. I think this is not an opinion. I think this is a reasonable extrapolation that this means that if someone resigns during that process, it is tantamount to an admission of guilt, at least as it applies to certification. So I think what this would encourage is that grievance processes will more often go to term. Internal investigations will more often have to be completed. It is in some ways a disincentive for a law enforcement officer to leave an agency under terms of an investigation because he would be decertified. So I would imagine, I would forecast that we would see a lot more of an HR process and an IA process to have to reach completion for these officers to have serious misconduct to be determined. And of note, and I think it is toward the bottom of what's provided here, is that the Criminal Justice Services Board, in promulgating the regulations, has to make a report back to the General Assembly by November of 2021. And I can't really tell you, well, yeah, I don't think it's included in there, but what that does though is provide some question as to the guidance for local governments between when the law becomes effective and when the report comes back. So it would require the board to hurry up and get their regulations promulgated and also to make a report back to the General Assembly. There is no specific enactment date for this, which means that it's presumed to be July 1st of the next year. The next bill, if you don't mind scrolling down, is Senate Bill 5030.
Abby, can you hold on one moment, please?
Oh, sure, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'd like to chat a little bit about this bill. This is an important bill, and we're going to, I've been nicknaming it the bad apple piece of legislation. Chief, just so that you know, should the governor sign this bill, this board would request that you provide us with any reports that are going to this board with respect to bills also provided to the CAC, which is this board, so that locally know what's going on. I know that should this pass, you'll have obligations going to Richmond, but CC'd is where this board wants you to go as well. So let's just take a brief moment to go around the room and ask if there are any questions for Abby about this. Brian Hall, do you have any questions for Abby?
Not at this point.
All right, Brian Williams, pardon me, Brent, yeah.
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you, Abby, for the update.
Okay. Diantha?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
All right, then John?
No question. Is there going to be an opportunity to discuss it later, as you suggested?
You mean in terms of down the road?
Yeah.
Or today?
I thought you said you were going to have a discussion period today.
Yeah, well, we're having it after each piece of legislation so that
okay.
we can. So if you have a question about this particular piece, now's a good time to ask Abby.
I guess I hate to ask Abby, it's not your personal opinion, but it's, from a legal sense, do you see this as kind of getting an assumed guilt, and is that going to hold up in court? If an officer, the investigation was not completed, yet he was or she was decertified, could they take that through whatever mechanism, either an HR or civil court? Will that, in your mind as a lawyer, would that hold up without a complete investigation?
Yeah, part of this is if you read down in the regular text of the existing legislation, the board has flexibility to enforce or not until such time they deem it as credible. So the Richmond board does have flexibility in this if you read down into the existing text of it. But go ahead, Abby. What are your thoughts?
Well, the local responsibility here is that the chief would need to make his notification to the board for action within 48 hours. What the board at the state level does, although it does suggest mandatory language that if they get a notification that one of these subsections has been met, that they should decertify that officer. As it relates to remedy for an officer, I would say that if this legislation is passed, I mean, there's no constitutional right to a particular profession. So if they quit in the midst of this statute indicates that they likely should be decertified, assuming the evidence is sufficient. And I don't see a particular recourse. I mean,
okay,
it's America, so they can always try, but there does not appear to be a specific remedy unless they claim that the process was not followed or that they did not actually fall into any of the subcategories requiring certification.
My only point was we're going to take an action, and there is not a responsibility on the department's part to complete the investigation. So we're having an outcome without and I just didn't know whether that was going to withstand a court challenge.
Well, because the language says terminated or resigns prior to, let's see, where is it? Pending, one of the subsections indicates a pending internal investigation involving serious misconduct that appears not to require the completion of an investigation, but I would probably throw this to the chief. Generally speaking, I think they try to reach a level of comfort with their investigation, even in the face of a resignation or a termination. But it would be up to I mean, obviously, if we're submitting the name of an officer for decertification, then we would be presenting a case to the board for them to consider. So.
Okay, thank you very much. I
think there's some flexibility on the board's on in letter E as in Eddie. When a conviction is not to become final, the board may decline to decertify the officer. So it's a little bit ambiguous with respect to their flexibility.
Okay,
I think the conviction language is meant to refer to the prior text, because generally speaking, if before this proposed legislation, an officer had to be convicted or plead guilty. And so they're just clarifying what, for their purposes, is a conviction, which means that it would have to be entirely litigated.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any?
You're gonna have to go. Sorry, just 1 second, please. Parenting at the same time.
Okay. All right, then let's move on to the next piece of legislation that we have before us. And I believe that's SB 32. This one died, but as you know, we mentioned before, the regular session starts up in January. And my notes there on the top is clearly just my opinion that it's likely to resurface in a modified form in next session. It has nothing to do with what's before you. It's just that's my opinion that this thing may continue to have legs on it in the next session. So Abby, please go forward with what this one's all about. I mean, pardon me. Olga.
The current state of the law under this code section is that certain assaults and batteries, if if someone is convicted of assault and battery against certain persons, then there is a mandatory sentence of 6 months. That includes law enforcement officers, judges, firefighters, volunteer firefighters, a jail superintendent. So what this change to this code section would do would be to remove that mandatory minimum and also provide that if there is a de minimis injury, if there's no injury, or if the assault is very slight, then they could be convicted not of assault and battery against a law enforcement officer, as is commonly referred to, but just simple assault. It also indicates that an officer who is the subject of the assault cannot take out the charge himself or herself. It must be referred or investigated by another law enforcement officer, and then it must be approved by the Commonwealth attorney. And that latter part seems to suggest that a law enforcement officer cannot be objective in taking out charges when he himself is the victim. But it also appears to assume that another law enforcement officer might not be objective, which requires the further approval of the Commonwealth attorney before the arrest, indictment, or processing of that, of the individual, the suspect, would take place. So this is, well, that's it in summary.
All right. If you notice that this bill is an SB bill, but if you'll notice, if you scroll down to the end, that it actually died in the House. And it's a little bit confusing about passing indefinitely with the yays and nays. Can you, Abby, can you shed a little light on, because some people might get a little confused about when they vote yay, it actually is voting to kill the bill. So,
right. Having not watched this in real time, what I would, based on this description, what I would surmise is that there was a motion to pass it by, and that motion had received an affirmative vote, which means that they are no longer going to consider it for this session. So it does appear to be an affirmative vote, but it's an affirmative vote on a motion to pass it by.
Correct. All right, well, let's chat for a couple moments about this. Brent, do you have any questions about this piece of legislation?
No questions. No.
All right.
No questions.
Brian, do you have some questions about the assault and battery bill?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Diantha?
No, I don't have any real questions. Maybe it's more a comment that I always worry when I see language like slight.
Yep.
Determines what slight is, because when we're talking about assault and battery.
Yes, ma'am.
What's slight?
Well, I will tell you that case law indicates that even making a motion like this at a law enforcement officer could be considered an assault, because battery requires a non-consensual touching. Assault does not. It doesn't actually require completed battery. It is just putting someone in imminent fear that they're going to be receive a bodily injury. So I would assume that it would fall in that class, although what you're pointing out is exactly what I think everybody else is anticipating, that if this were to be reintroduced and ultimately passed, then there would be a tremendous amount of cases that hang on whether or not it's slight.
Mm-hmm. And what's slight for one person, to be honest with you, and I'm not even thinking about how you feel about it, but if you have, just say, I'm just making this up as an exaggeration, but what is assault to an 80-year-old might be very different
Right.
outcome from to a 30-year-old. That's an exaggeration, but you understand what I'm getting at. So.
Well, and as another example, spitting, if
Yeah.
someone spits on a law enforcement officer, that is an assault and battery. And it doesn't necessarily involve an injury, but it's not clear how a court would interpret that, whether or not that is slight because there's no injury, or if it exposes them to certain dangers, even though there's no bodily injury, is that considered slight? So I'm just using that as an example, but it's one that's going to have to be litigated.
your example is better than mine, but that's why you're attorney and I'm a nurse. Thank you.
John, you have any questions about the assault and battery legislation that failed?
No question, Richard?
Okay, Olga?
Is there any chance of that actually passing? I mean, this sounds absolutely insane, in my opinion.
No, this is dead for this budgetary session.
Okay, so right now, if somebody does try to do anything to harm an officer, they go to jail. Is that correct?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, if they were to be convicted, ultimately, then yes, there is at least a 6-month mandatory sentence.
Okay, so they have to be convicted.
Yes. It does not comment at all on their pretrial status, whether they're on bond or not. It doesn't comment on that.
And I mean, I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but I mean, is this being enforced?
Yes. I mean,
Okay.
are you asking whether or not charges are brought under this code section?
I just see it all over the country, and I don't know that it's being enforced. So that's why I'm asking. Maybe here, is that something that's being enforced?
Well, I'd probably have to pass this to the chief if he has any stats, but I prosecuted for 6 years, and yes, this was not uncommon.
Okay.
Chief, Olga had a question for you about whether the existing code is being enforced here locally.
Yes, Richard. Amanda is correct. It is being enforced here locally. In the annual report, I also highlight how many officers we have assaulted every year. And I think last year we had it's either 9 or 10 officers that were assaulted last year, and charges were brought in each case.
Thank you.
Okay. All righty, then I have no further questions. So Amanda, I'm going to ask you to move on to the next piece, which is a House Bill 5013. And this is civil litigation. This is incredibly important to the department. All right.
And I will say,
what about this one?
I've been following these bills and others since the beginning of the special session, and I will say that this is the one that I have, well, I'm trying not to, well, I've been the most concerned about it because I think it has some wide-reaching implications, not only for individual law enforcement officers, but for localities themselves. The current state of the law is that if an individual believes that their constitutional rights have been violated, or if they believe that they have been unjustly arrested, if they have been, if excessive force has been used, they have remedy both in the state and federal court. They can be, an officer can be charged with assault and battery for use of excessive force. That is the definition of it. They could also be sued civilly in state court for false imprisonment or any number of different kind of torts. So there's currently that remedy on the state court level. I mean, obviously officers could be prosecuted on the state level as well, but this is involving a civil action. Also currently, if an individual believes their constitutional rights have been violated, they can sue in federal court the law enforcement officer under 42 USC 1983. It's commonly referred to as a 1983 action. So there is currently a remedy on the federal level, but what this proposed legislation would do is to create a state level cause of action for essentially the same kind of lawsuit, just not in the federal system, in the state system. But importantly, the major difference, and one that really flagged this for me, is that it would remove the qualified immunity or sovereign immunity defenses that are available in current 1983 actions. Also of particular import is that there is a portion of this bill that requires a duty of care of the locality or the employer of the law enforcement officer, which does change the state of the law, because currently localities are not, they're not liable in a civil action unless there is a policy or a pattern in practice that can be proven that suggests that the locality and or its supervisors have allowed this kind of constitutional violation to become a part of the practice of the agency. So just to summarize, the two major differences that this would create by having a state level civil action for deprivation of rights is that one, it removes the immunity defense, which is central and is the most frequently used defense in 1983 actions currently. And also it would have a locality likely named as a co-defendant. And I would venture to say every single action. Because right now, when a case is brought against a law enforcement officer in a 1983 action, it is against that individual law enforcement officer, not against the county, usually not against the supervisor. Although there is that possibility, as I said, you can make a showing that the locality had a pattern in practice or a policy that resulted in this officer violating someone's rights. It could also currently a supervisor could be named as a defendant as well if it's shown that that supervisor knew or should have known that this person was engaged in this kind of activity. But those currently require showings to have those other defendants proceed in the case. This law would essentially make it a matter of course that the locality would be sued every time an officer gets sued. And again, they would have no sovereign immunity to claim as a defense. This would encourage trials, and insurance would be an issue for everybody.
All right, so if we scroll down a little, we'll see what happened, how this thing died. Of course, this is a Senate bill, and if you look to the very end there, it was the Senate passed it indefinitely, which again means that it was killed. And
actually, Mr. Hewitt, it was originally a House bill.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was a House bill. It was defeated at one point. There was a motion to reconsider, so it was brought back before the House. Actually, before that, a committee voted it down. So this has had several lives, and so I don't think the conversation is over as it relates to this.
Right. That's why I put that up there in the top right-hand corner. All righty. Well, it's dead for the time being. And in my view, this has a reasonable likelihood to be revisited again in the main session, which will be coming up in January. So I'm going to call around the room and ask if there's some comments about that, starting with Mr. Brent Hall.
It's definitely concerning, for sure. I'm glad it didn't pass, but it's just a little bit of a wow factor, I guess.
There were four of those this time.
Brian Williams?
Yes, and man, if you could kind of speak a little more about the duty of reasonable care. What is that? If you can kind of put that in layman's terms for me, so I can have
Where are you referring, Brian?
If you look at the last sentence.
I'm sorry, if you'll give me just a second. I had the bill pulled up on my current laptop, but I can't do it with the Zoom on. So give me just 1 second. I'll get you the actual language.
Yeah, it's on the second to last line there. Reader owes a duty of reasonable care is what Brian's question is, Amanda.
Well, and right, and it's hiring, supervision, training, retention, and use of law enforcement officers under its employment. Any such entity may be liable to a third party for any injuries or damages sustained by the third party caused in whole or in part by a breach of this duty. That's very broad language, and it suggests that if the locality is, if it's proven the locality did not sufficiently train, retained on its roles an officer that it should have fired, should not have hired, should have had information it knew would prohibit that person from being qualified as an applicant. If the supervision was lax in any way, and again, all this kind of thing is what would be litigated. I mean, it would be the subject of argument. But what that means is that the locality would have to go argue it. And so they would not be able to just claim sovereign immunity, which is currently the defense that's available they would have to argue on the facts that their policies did not encourage it, that they provided adequate training, that they had sufficient processes and implementation for hiring, that their supervision, it's a new civil action, and has potentially very sweeping effects. I'm not sure I answered your question. What does reasonable care mean? Is that what?
No, it provides me a better, more clarity in terms of thinking about the implications for policies, right? So I know in some departments they have use of force policies that include duty to intervene. Is there a connection between, having those types of policies requiring duty to intervene to possibly get at this whole notion of duty of reasonable care?
Again, this hasn't been litigated to under this language, certainly. It's not even law, but what I will tell you is that that's something to be argued. One argument could be if your policies are in line with your accreditation requirements, if I were in the situation where I were defending a department against a suit of this kind, that would be an argument I would make, is that our policies are in line with our accreditation requirements. And so our policies are sufficient. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't allege that that's too low a threshold. It's just, honestly, it would be unknown.
Thank you.
All right, so we're running a little short on time. Diane, do you have any questions about this particular bill?
No, I'm fine. Thank you, Richard.
John?
No questions.
Olga? Olga, any questions about this particular bill?
No, sir.
All righty. Let's move on to, which is not a bill, it's a budgetary amendment, and this is the defunding, the 25%. So what happens, and Amanda, I need you to share what your thoughts are on this about budgetary amendments and they being removed instead of, the traditional process of being killed.
Procedurally, not to be too simple about it, but one who proposes an amendment can certainly withdraw that amendment. And the only thing that really matters is the budget bill that is ultimately voted on and passed. And I think what you may be referring to is what amounts to a defunding amendment that was proposed. And my understanding, and I will admit that I have not studied the budget bill in any real depth. So I want to put that qualification out there. But my understanding is that the amendment to reduce funding to the state police by, I believe, a figure of 25%. I don't think that is currently an amendment attached to the budgetary bill. But like I said, that I have not studied the budget in the same way that I have the actual proposed legislation to code sections.
Yeah, well, you were accurate in your depiction of the events. Do we have any questions associated with the budget amendment that has been removed on the 25%? And we'll start with Brent.
No questions.
Brian?
No questions?
Okay. Diantha?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay. John?
No questions.
All right. And Olga?
Nope.
All right, then. Thank you very much for that. Amanda, I know you have another meeting to go to, so we want to thank you for your updating us on the legislation, and we'd hope to see you again soon. So we'll let you sign.
Thanks for having me. And before I leave, I just wanted to note that there are a couple of other bills that we didn't discuss this morning, some of which are still alive and in conference committee. Maybe most importantly, Senate Bill 5030, which has a lot of separate components, but just for your awareness.
All right, we'll see how that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All righty, then we're going to take the remaining time and we're going to talk about a very important topic. And this topic is going to be introduced and discussed by Captain Terry Walls. This has to do really with current events and COVID-19 and patrol officers and the citizens, the public, the interaction. And I'm particularly interested in hearing what he's doing to keep the public safe. So I'll let you go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, it's Captain Terry Walls. I'm the commander for the Jefferson District for the Patrol Division. The assignments that I've had this year is been assigned to the COVID incident management team with the county. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of two tracks, the county's track of what they've been doing, and then a little bit more about what the police department has done. So kind of a timeline is in early March, when all of the COVID started hitting the world, we developed an incident management team at the county, and that is comprised of a lot of different components of the county government, the county exec's office, public safety component, facilities, HR, a little bit of everybody, and these issues come through and are discussed, and decisions are made. And the police department's just one cog of that. And this, as it started out, it came out with a lot of the policies that we're following, where telecommuting for many of the county's employees became an everyday occurrence. Inventories on our PPE with throughout the county, our cleaning supplies, that was a really big topic early on, making sure we had hand sanitizer and face mask. And those are just a few of the topics that they discussed. At the county level, there was many discussions about the stance of what the county was going to do, closing buildings, not closing buildings. And ultimately, we know that they led to the closing of the buildings, and then just certain essential services open. Parks and rec were closed. There was several safety implementations, COVID check-ins where employees would do a health screening every day. There's temperature kiosks were installed throughout both county office buildings, so people can do a temperature screening when they enter the building. So many things like that have been implemented through these IMT meetings. In addition to that, a lot of the discussions with the IMT are the numbers. There's case reports for the state, for the district, and for Albemarle County that come in every week. It's tied into some officials with the hospital. So there's reports from the hospital about the number of cases that they have, the number of beds that they have, just to evaluate the community safety and the community health at the time. We have weekly communications with the health department to make sure we're following the standard protocols, that we're doing what we need to do, whether the county needs to do anything additional. Early on, and they continue, was education. There was a lot of educational material that the county has sent out to the community. And in August, the county actually developed to go, in addition to the governor's executive orders, the local county ordinance. And one of the big components of that part of the ordinance was education, and the county developed an ambassador program that would send out ambassadors to businesses to provide them signs for their businesses that talks about the ordinance, what was required, that you had to have a mask, the number of people that could be in a restaurant, things like that. So the educational piece, the IMT has constantly been putting out information to the community. In addition to, there's been many mask giveaway days throughout the community in areas where people may not have had a mask, especially early on. I don't know the number, but thousands of masks have been handed out within the community to help prevent the community spread. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the things that the IMT looks at. They look at when buildings may open up, when maybe some of these restrictions could possibly end. So they're always looking at that information. As it relates to the police department directly, the early in March, the police department started doing a lot of education, and a lot of that was for our officers. And it started out very simple. It was social distancing, changing the way that officers do business, where normally an officer would respond to a call, go right into a residence in a domestic situation and talk to people. We had to kind of modify the way that we do our work. And part of that was by having our ECC screen calls and try to get that information. If we were possibly dealing with a sick person ahead of time, we tried to get people to come out. If we were going to someone's residence, instead of maybe entering the residence on a domestic, we would try to get people to meet us in the yard. So to help protect officers, we could maintain that 6 or 10-foot distance between people. We did a lot of scrambling early on to make sure we had hand sanitizers for officers so they would be able to decontaminate themselves, and cleaning supplies so they could keep their cars. They're essentially in their cars, most patrol officers, for 10 hours a day. So we wanted to make sure we had disinfectant so they could decontaminate their cars after calls. And if they ever had to go hands-on with somebody, they could make sure that they were getting decontaminated. A lot of our civilian employees in March started telecommuting, and that has continued. And surprisingly, the chief has been very supportive of this, and it's worked out very good, and allowed a lot of our civilians to stay probably safer by not being in the public as much. We eventually went to what we called a second phase of COVID. That was probably around April. That phase was where we would try to take calls by phone if possible. So if it was a property crime, instead of going to the scene, we would try to get that information over the phone and not risk officers having contact directly with the public unless it was a necessity. And we tried to limit that to burglary calls, robbery calls, civil disturbance calls, traffic related incidents that were impeding the flow of traffic, or anything that required maintaining law and order, we would go to. But other things, if it was an accident, for example, an accident involving a deer, we would try to get that information over the phone instead of risking an officer. We had to limit time off. Officers weren't able to take time off as often as they may like. A lot of our training was suspended, especially in-person training. And this year, probably about 80 to 90% of our in-service training has now been completed online. So we really had to change the way we do business. A lot of our firearms qualifications were modified. Instead of running a firearms line of 8 officers, we would have to reduce that to 3 or no more 4 to make sure we're maintaining social distancing. We suspended a lot of our community engagement just to limit contact with the public. We made it early on mandated for officers to wear their mask. We found out that an officer not wearing a mask was a lot more exposed. And if we were going to follow the health department guidelines, when we engaged with somebody that showed symptoms, we were having to quarantine officers after these encounters, and the use of the mask reduced those number of quarantines greatly. So we early on came up with a guideline to make sure the officers were wearing their masks, because staffing just would not have stood if we, you have 4 officers go to a call and all 4 of them have to go into quarantine after that call. So it was a lot of learning on our part on what was going to help us keep our staffing at acceptable levels. I know we're running short on time. That's kind of in a nutshell some of the things we did. We did as many transports of arrested persons in our van because of the air filtration systems. That was a big help. We used some of our staff that was kind of displaced because of COVID. The chief allowed some staff to transfer temporarily. Our SROs, for example, when school wasn't in session, were free. So we used those to drive the transport vans, which allowed a little bit more staffing coverage, and that van being accessible to use for transports has been outstanding. And most of these protocols are still in place even now. We're still doing these things, even though some of the numbers are coming down and the percent positivity is reducing, just to make sure that we keep our staff safe and healthy. We're still following most of these protocols still yet. And I'm happy to answer any questions anybody may have.
Well, we're running a little short on time. Can members give you a ring later on today at the office?
Yes, sir.
What's the best number to reach you at?
434-872-4544.
Okay, we'd like to thank you very much for that report, Captain. Next meeting is going to be on Tuesday, December 8th. And we're going to be reaching out to ask our visiting Board of Supervisor member, Ann Malik, to attend. The next item will be, we're going to reach out to Commonwealth Attorney Jim Hensley and have him discuss his new job with the challenges and the good and the not so good or difficult. And then also we're going to reach out to the new ECC director, which is more commonly known as the 911 Center. What is happening in this region, and what do we do, and how are we preparing for a crisis? So having said all that, I'd like to take a moment and thank our board members today for their service, and also our visiting supervisor, B. Kirtley, and of course you, Captain, and Amanda for the fabulous job she has done. So,
Richard, before we go, I hate to interrupt, but we need to approve the minutes from August the 11th. We haven't done that. So I would just like to make sure somebody puts a motion on the table to approve those minutes. Before.
Right. Do we have a motion to approve minutes, last board meetings minutes?
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you very much, Diantha. You're very helpful. With that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, look forward to seeing everybody again coming up on Tuesday, December 8th. Until then,